Hi and welcome to a very exciting tutorial about a nice RSS reader with some really cool features like CoreData integration and a lot more that we are going to cover just in a minute. But this is one day before Christmas Eve, and so we have to talk about presents. And my present for you this year is going to be access to 2 Udemy courses for free, and I am going to give you 20 access codes for this course, Start Developing iOS Apps with Swift for Beginners, and Truly Universal, where you can learn how to create iOS apps that fit on every screen size of iOS devices that are currently out there. All you have to do is comment below this video and tell me what we can do to improve this RSS reader, which I'm going to show you now. So this RSS reader actually displays at the moment the New York Times feed. And an RSS reader is basically quite cool, since when we have a look at, for example, Lifehacker, and you want to get all the newest of their blog posts in a nice little place, then you can scroll down here and you can subscribe to the RSS feed. And what we are going to do is we are going to create an app that can access those RSS feeds of almost every blog out there. So to do that, we can just swipe to the right and add a feed to our app. So I have prepared the feed of Lifehacker and just copying that. And let's just enter a name here, which is Lifehacker, and enter the URL of the Lifehacker RSS feed, and save this one. And now, as you can see in our sidebar, there's Lifehacker. Once I click it, you can see all the current blog posts of Lifehacker. Once you click on it, we're going to open a browser integrated to our app, and you can scroll down. You can even click on the links here. Once I find one, let's see, learning to code. You see here this progress bar. We can go back. We can go back here, add another feed, like the New York Times technology feed, for example. So let me just copy that feed address as well. So let's just say NYT, which is tech. All right, let's enter the RSS feed address by pasting it here. So click save. And now we can see here is New York Times technology, and we click on it. Oh, we already had that actually. This is the standard feed, but as you can see, we can just switch between Lifehacker or New York Times and get all the blog posts directly to our integrated web browser. So how are we going to do this? Well, there are some things that we're going to use for this tutorial. First of all, we're going to use a CoreData helper, which we already created in an earlier tutorial this year, which is from July. I have updated the CoreData helper to work with the newest version of Xcode, and you will find this in this helper folder that you get with the tutorial file. So this is one thing. Then we also created this sidebar already in September, and I have also updated the code files for this blurry slide bar control. And we're also going to use some other third-party controls like the MW feed parser, which is going to help us with getting the block data, which is stored in XML. So XML is actually used for the RSS feed. And we are going to use this feed parser to get all the necessary information. And I've also included these files within this helper folder, and we'll just have to drag and drop that into our project. And we will also use the KIN web browser, which will give us a really, really cool web browser for our RSS feed reader, which I've also already included into this helper folder. So let's get started and create a new Xcode project, which is going to be a single view application. Product name is going to be RSS Reader. The language we're going to use is Swift, of course. This is going to be an iPhone app. And we don't check this use CoreData for now, since we want to integrate it all by ourselves. So let's give this an organization identifier. Let me just use com training and click next and create this project on the desktop. All right, now let's start by have a look at the user interface. As you can see, it's pretty simple. We have, if we click here, we have a simple table view controller, which is embedded into a navigation controller. So we get rid of this standard view controller, click on the library, object library down here, and just drag and drop a table view controller to our storyboard. We will then select this table view controller, click editor, embed in navigation controller, and there it is, our navigation controller, which also created the navigation bar for us directly here. And what we now have to do is click on this navigation controller and click on the attributes inspector and click here on is initial view controller, so that the storyboard knows that we want to jump to this view controller as soon as our app starts. All right, then let's bring up the document outliner by clicking on this nice little symbol here and have a look at the table view controller. And we should give this table view cell, so we're clicking on the table view cell here, an identifier so that we can access it later. I'm just using cell here. And also we can actually delete this, this view controller.swift file. So right click, delete, and move to trash. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on the app delegate, press Command N, select Cocoa Touch class, and then we're going to create the feed table view controller, but it's enough to write feed here and say that this is going to be a subclass of UI table view controller, and Xcode auto completes this class name for us. We say next, targets set to RSS Reader, and create. And now all we have to do is click on our main storyboard and click on our table view controller, and then click here on the right side to the identity inspector and choose our newly created class, which was feed table view controller. But we have to pay attention to the class name here, which is the table view cell at the moment. So we have to choose the table view controller here and make sure we add this custom class to the table view controller, and this is feed table view controller. I already told you that we will use some helper classes and some files that we have included in the helper folder. But before we can do that, there are some Objective-C classes within this helper folder. So we need to create an Objective-C bridging header first. So let's select the app delegate, press Command N, and select the Cocoa Touch class here, and make sure that we now have selected Objective-C here. And we can simply use a subclass of NSObject or whatever actually, and give this some stupid name, click next, and make sure the target is RSS Reader, and create. And now Xcode asks us if we would like to configure an Objective-C bridging header. And we want to do that, and we say yes. And now we can delete these two files of the class we have just created, simply selecting them and hit delete and move them to trash. Now we have this bridging header here, and now we can simply use our helper folder here and drag it into our project and make sure that destination copy items, if needed, is selected, and simply finish. All right. And now we have a lot of helper classes here, which includes the KIN web browser, which also includes the MW feed parser, which is this one. And what we want to do now is include all of the necessary header files into our bridging header. And these are actually just two. And we will import the MW feed parser.h, and we will also import the KIN web browser view controller, which we're going to use later. So now let's build this application, and this should build successfully, and it does. And now, since we're going to use CoreData, let's also make sure that we link our project against the CoreData framework. So let's hit our project here, RSS Reader, click on the linked frameworks and libraries, click on plus and CoreData, and that should do it. Now, well, let's close this helper folder here, and let's focus on the feed Tableview controller.swift file. And what we want to do first is display the feed of, let's say, the New York Times technology section. So what we want to do is, first of all, create a function for a feed request. So let's create this function just below Viewdidload, or let's say above Viewdidload, and call this function request. No parameters for the moment. And the first thing we're going to do is creating a URL, which is going to be an NS URL from string. So I have already prepared this string. So let me just copy and paste that. This is the string. You can get this if you simply open Safari and New York Times RSS. If you type that, and then you can just select the New York Times and choose whatever RSS feed you want to use. Just right-click it, copy link, and then we can simply insert that to here. Well, now we have the education. Let's switch back to the technology section. And what we want to do now is create a feed parser object. So let's simply do that by saying let feed parser equals MW feed parser, and we will initialize that with the URL, which is simply our URL that we already created. And now we have to use some delegates of the first of all of the feed parser, and we'll set feed parser and its delegate to self. That means we have to adopt this delegate, so we click here at the end of this line and say comma, and adopt now the MW feed parser delegate, and this error is going to vanish as soon as we have adopted this protocol here. All right, now all we have to do left is actually say feed parser.parse. And now the feed parser begins parsing our feed here. Now what we need is going to be an array which stores all the results that it gets from the New York Times RSS feed. Therefore, we're going to create an array here as a property, which is going to be a variable. It's called feed items, and we're going to initialize it with an array of MW. So it's an array, don't forget the brackets here, it's an array of MW feed items, and initialize it, and that's it. Well, now we have to use all of those delegate methods of the feed parser. So let's just do that here and mark that with mark, and this is going to be the feed parser delegate. And the first thing we want to do is adopting the feed parser did start method. And what we want to do is we want to reinitialize our feed items and clear them just by simply initialize it again with the array of MW feed items. So this is the first step. Now the second step is going to be when the feed parser finishes to parse, and what we want to do then is we use the table view of our Tableview controller and simply say reload data so that we get the newest items in our list. Next thing we want to do is access the feed info. So when the feed parser did parse feed info, what we want to do is display the feed title in our navigation bar. So to do that, we simply say, well, we can also print line this. So let's say info. And now we'll simply access self.title of our navigation controller and say info.title. And now we have the title of our New York Times feed at the in the navigation bar at the top. So this were the first easy steps. Now let's continue with filling this this feed items array by simply accessing the feed parser did parse feed item, and all we need to do now is accessing the feed items array and append the newest item that we have found when parsing the New York Times RSS feed. So let's just add the item here. So, and that's the beauty of it, actually, that we use this MW feed parser, which saves us all the work with actually working with the hard XML code, and we can simply now adopt these methods, and then we're done with the RSS stuff, or the parsing stuff, actually. And now we can focus on the features of our application. And we will now have to have a look at the Tableview, data source, and delegate methods. And therefore, we scroll a bit down and go to the Tableview data source. And we have actually just one section. We can remove this warning here. And we're going to have a number of rows in section, and this number of rows is actually going to be the number of items that is stored in our array. So we simply access our array, feed items, count the number of items that are stored within it, and these are the number of rows in our section. Also, we remove the warning here. And to have some space for our items, we simply have a look at the Tableview hide for row at index path. So let's scroll down a little, hide for row at index path, and return something about 100 pixels. And what we do now is accessing the content of our, or the title of our feed items, and we do that within the self for row at index path method. So first of all, we will remove the comments around it so that we have a nice Tableview self row at index path method here, and we have used cell as a reuse identifier, so this is what we have to enter here. And now we are ready to configure the cell. So first of all, we are going to create an item which is stored in our feed items array, and access this one, feed items, some brackets to access the index, and this is index path dot row, and now we have to cast that to an MW feed item. And now it's really simple to display the block entry title. We simply have to say cell.textLabel.text equals the item's title. And that's all there is. So we actually can now run the app for the first time and have a look at what we have already done. And we can see nothing yet, and I think this is because we haven't called the request method. Yes, so we are going to do this in the ViewWillAppear method. So since we are already here in Viewdidload, let's also remove the comments here to give us some more space, and then directly below the Viewdidload method, let's call ViewWillAppear, call super ViewWillAppear, give it the proper parameter of animated, and now let's simply call our request method that we have already defined here. Run the application again, and now we should see the magic. And here is the firewall asking for access to the New York Times. Allow it, and there we are. There are our nice blog entries of the New York Times. The only thing that we can't do right now is click on them, and that's what we're going to do right now. So before we continue, let's remove all of this code here, since we are not going to need it, which is all part of the Tableview delegate and data source. And what we need to do now is implementing the Tableview did select row at index path method. So let's write Tableview and let's search for did select row at index path. And what we do is really simple again. We will create an item, and the item is actually based on the index path and the row of the cell we clicked, and this is corresponding with the item stored in our feed items array. So let's simply say feed items, access the array with some brackets, index path dot row, and also again convert this to an MW feed item. And now we will have to create a browser window, and therefore we have used, or we have already integrated, the KIN web browser component. And to use it, we simply have to create a web browser view controller. And to do so, we will say let web browser equals KIN web browser view controller, and we will just simply initialize it with this initializer. And now we have to create a URL, and the URL is going to be a NS URL from a string, and the string is stored in the item, and there is a property called link, which gives us a string of the proper URL. And now all we need to do is say web browser.load URL and insert the URL as a parameter. And now we can access our navigation controller with self navigation controller push view controller, and we use our web browser view controller, and we want this to be animated. And now we can run the application again, and what we are going to see is pretty cool, since we just have to click on this item and we're getting the progress bar, and we have the full article here of our New York Times blog item here. At the moment, this is all very boring, since we cannot add our own blogs or our own blog feeds to this app. What we need to do is creating a possibility for the user to add his own blog feeds. To do that, we are going to integrate a sidebar into our app, and we have already created this sidebar controller in a previous tutorial, and we are going to use this now to integrate a nice sidebar into our RSS reader. And to do that, we will go back to the feed Tableview controller and create a property at the top, which is going to be a variable sidebar, and we simply initialize it with sidebar. And to start this a little easier, let's go into the Viewdidload method and initialize the sidebar with one standard item. So let's say sidebar in lowercase, and initialize it with a source view, which is going to be the navigation controller, self navigation controller, and then unwrap this one and access its view. And the menu items, it's pretty simple at the moment. We will simply add an array here and say add feed. And this is going to be our sidebar. And we also want to set its delegate. So let's say sidebar.delegate equals self. And as we did with our parser, we also need to adopt the sidebar delegate in order to check which item we pressed once we drag out the sidebar. And what we need to do now is actually implementing this this delegate method. So let's add this above Viewdidload and mark this as well. This is going to be the sidebar delegate. And it is called sidebar did select menu button at index. So since the add feed button is always the first one, we can simply check if index equals 0. Then we know this is our add feed button. But before we implement the logic for this if statement here, let's simply run the application again and have a look at it. And as you can see, we can now drag out this sidebar, and now we have to implement the logic for pressing this button here. But it's quite nice, actually. So what we want to do is creating an alert view that asks the user for adding a new feed, giving him 2 text fields to enter a name for the feed and the feed URL, and 2 buttons for canceling the operation and adding the feed to our application. So let's create this alert by saying UI alert controller with a title, let's say, add new feed. The message is going to be enter feed name and URL. It's going to be UI alert controller style alert, not an action sheet. And now we have to add some things here. First of all, we add a text field with configuration handler, and we simply press enter here. And now we can say this is a text field, UI text field. Unwrap it, and this text field, we did write this into the parameters here in this closure so that we can configure it a little more, let's say with a placeholder. So let's say text field.placeholder is going to be feed name, and let's now add another one, add text field with configuration, again text field, UI text field exclamation mark, and this time text field.placeholder is going to be feed URL. And now we have to add 2 buttons, which is the first one is add action, UI alert action. This is going to be cancel, so the style of the button is going to be UI alert action style cancel. There's no need for a handler here. And the second button is also UI alert action. The title is going to be safe. UI alert action style is going to be default. And now within our handler, we need to do some more things. So again, here is an alert action, UI alert action, exclamation mark. And here we need to do some cool things. Since we need to access these text fields, we need to know some things about them. First of all, we need those text fields within an array. So we create an array called text fields and access the text fields property of our alert controller, which gives us an array of any object. And now we have to create 2 text fields. Let's say feed name text field, and this, since there are only 2 text fields, we know that when we access the array of text fields, we can simply say first, which is the first item within our array, and convert that to a UI text field. And then we have the feed URL text field, and since this is the second and last text field that we are using within our alert controller, we can say text fields dot last and also convert that to UI text field. And now we can actually say if the feed name text field dot text is not empty, and if the feed URL text field.text is not empty, then we can do some things. Well, actually we want to save the newly created feed now, but where could we save them? Well, we could use a text file to save them. We could also use the NSUser defaults to save them, but we can also, and this is a very clean way to save them, we could also use CoreData. So let's use CoreData, but before we get started with adding a CoreData database, let's show this alert controller. So let's say self.present view controller alert animated true with no completion closure. And to create a CoreData database, we will simply select our main storyboard, press Command N on the keyboard, and select a CoreData template for a data model. And we will call this feed model. Hit create, and there is our feed model.xcode data model. And what we need to do to create a CoreData database and work with the nice objects that will be created for us within the database, we need to create an entity. So we add an entity here at the bottom and give this entity a name, which is going to be a feed. And now we have to specify the attributes for a feed, which are simple. Well, there is a name, which is of type string, and there's also going to be a URL, which is also going to be a string. And that's all there is. So you see, this is a very simple database, but you also see that it's going to be very, very easy to use such a simple database to store even a very, very small amount of data. Now, to work with this entity and with our data model, we have to create an NS managed object of this entity feed. To do that, we click on the entity, hit editor, and create NS managed object subclass. Select the feed model, click next, select the entity, which we are going to use. And now, as you can see, as a default parameter, Objective-C is selected as a language. You can choose Swift. However, I had some bad experiences with using Swift here, so I simply create an Objective-C class here and create. And then we simply have to use this, this .h file of our feed managed object, which is an NS managed object, and put this import statement to our bridging header. And we can use this managed object exactly in the same way as we could if it were created as a Swift file. But I think it's somehow a little safer to use it that way. Well, you can experiment with that, but I'm going to use it for the tutorial as an Objective-C class. And now we can actually fill the gap here in our if statement. So if the user entered both a feed name and a feed URL, we can save both these information into our database. To do that, we will have to create a managed object context for our from our database. And therefore, we can use the CoreData helper that we created in the previous tutorial. And if you want to know more about CoreData, I also suggest that you have a look at those tutorials where I explain the basics of CoreData. But for now, we will simply concentrate on getting our data into the database and store it there and also retrieve it when we need it. So we will use the Swift CoreData helper and get our managed object context into this object. And what we want to do now is create a feed object, which is a managed object created by CoreData. And so we also use the Swift CoreData helper and insert a managed object of class. And we now need to create NSString from class. And the class is feed. And we want this to happen in our managed object context, MOC. And we also need to convert that to a feed, actually. All right. Now we can access this feed object and fill in some information like a name. And the name is going to be, as this is the feed name actually, so the name is going to be the feed name text fields text property. And also we can access the URL property of our feed object. And of course, this is going to be the home of the feed URL text field dot text. And that's it actually. Now all we need to do is save our managed object context. So let's say Swift CoreData helper, save managed object context, MOC. And now we have saved our data into the database, but there is no way to display it. So what we need to do now is creating a function that will load our saved feeds. So let's also do that here below the request method, and let's call this one function load saved feeds. No parameters needed here. And to use that function, we will create 2 more arrays at the beginning of our file here below the protocols. So let's first of all create a array of saved feeds, and this is going to be an array of feeds. So we're going to use some brackets here and initialize it, and we will also create a array of feed names, which we'll also create as an array of strings. And what we want to do now is first of all clear those two arrays, since we want to access this this function more than one time. So let's say saved feeds equals feed, and also here feed names equals string and parentheses, which is basically only initialization for an array of feed objects, and here an array of string objects, which is pretty type safe. And now, first of all, we want, as a feed name, we want to append our add feed button so that we can use it later. And now we want to retrieve all the feeds that are already stored within our database. So let's again create a managed object context using Swift CoreData helper managed object context. And now we will fetch some results from the database. So let's create a results object here, which again uses Swift CoreData helper. Use the fetch entities method here, and again we will use the ns string from class method here. Enter the feed class here. We don't need a predicate to specify our search within the database, and of course we search in our MOC managed object context. So if there are any results, so if results.count is greater than 0, then we can do some things. Well, for example, we know that we have feeds as a result, so we can go through each feed in results. And now let's also create a feed object of this one. So since this is an any object and we need all the information we can get, we will convert this to a feed and simply store it in this temporary object f. And now we will append this object f to our saved feeds array. So simply add f here. And also we will append the feed's name to our feed names array here. And now we will have a look at the Viewdidload method. Go down here, and what we want to do now is just cut this this part of code here and add this to our load saved feeds below the if statement here. And now we won't add this array with only one add object, which is add feed. We want to add now the feed names array, which includes all of the necessary names and also the add feed button again as the first object within our sidebar. So let's now have a look at what we can do. We also have to go back down here to our sidebar did select menu button at index, and once we actually saved our managed object context here and we inserted a new object, so a new feed for our sidebar, we also have to call load saved feeds, and we want to do the same thing in Viewdidload, but since we're in a closure here, we have to add a self here, and here we can simply say load saved feeds. And now we can run the app and see what happens. So there is our New York Times, and let me see if I still have the Lifehacker feed here. All right, let's swipe to the right, click add feed, and there's our action sheet, our alert controller, our alert view. We will add Lifehacker, paste this Lifehacker feed address, click Save, open this one up, and now there is Lifehacker retrieved from our database. Well, now we have to do something about also make this able to be clickable or pressable in our sidebar. So we will add an else statement to sidebar did select menu at index. So let's add else here. So every time we press a button other than the add feed button, we want to do a specific action. And this action is actually pretty simple. We simply want to do another request, but this time with a specified URL and not with the standard URL. So let's go back here and select the request function here at the top and make some pretty important changes to it. First of all, what we need to do is add a parameter. So this time we want to give it a URL parameter. Let's say URL string, which is going to be a string. And if the URL string is nil, so we also have to make this optional. So if URL string is nil, what we want to do is doing exactly this. What we already did, we specify URL, create a feed parser, set a delegate, and parse the whole thing. Now, if there is a specified URL as a URL string, we do actually the same, except that we don't use the New York Times URL. We are using our own URL string here. Well, and that's actually all there is, except for unwrapping this one here, and then our error goes away. And now we have two errors since we have a missing parameter here. When the view will appear, so when the first time we're launching the app, and when we get back from having a look at the blog post, we don't want to specify a specific URL, but when we have selected a feed from our sidebar, then we want to insert the specific URL feed that we have selected in our latest case, for example, Lifehacker. And to do that, we need to retrieve the information from the database. So why is this important? Why do we have to access our database again? Well, CoreData saves the feed items that we get in a so-called faulted state so that they don't take so much memory. We have to access them ourselves and get them back into memory. And to do that, we create another managed object context. So Swift CoreData helper, managed object context. And now we can create a selected feed object and simply use the managed object context and use the existing object with ID. And all we need to do now is access our saved feeds, which is an array, getting its index -1, since there is this this add button at the top, so we have to subtract 1 and say object ID, no error needed here. Also convert that to a feed, and now we can request our selected feeds URL. All right, now let's run the application. Open our sidebar, click on Lifehacker, and there it is. There are the Lifehacker blog posts. And that's actually it. We've now created a pretty amazing feed reader in a very little amount of time, using some components that were already there and adding some magic of our own. And now we can again click on add feed and add as many new feeds that we actually want. Now let's also make this a little more nice looking, and I'm going to show you a way to customize this navigation bar a little further. And therefore we are going to access the app-delegate.swift file and go into the did finish launching with options method. And we will now use the UI navigation bar and its appearance class. And first of all, we want to change the bar tint color, which is the background color. Let's say UI color. of red, green, blue, and we use, let's say, 0.89 red, 0.506 green, and 0.384 blue. Alpha is 1. And now we will also change the font and the buttons to a white color. So therefore, we use also the UI navigation bar, its appearance, but this time not the bar tint color, but simply the tint color, and which is UI color white color. And actually, these are only the buttons, for example. To change also the text color of our navigation bar, we have to do something else. We have to, again, use UI navigation bar, appearance, but this time title, text, attributes. And as you can see, this requires a dictionary. And what we do now is simply defining such a dictionary with the key and as foreground color attribute name and the value UI color, white color in our case. Now let's run it again. And there it is. There's our specified background color. As you can see, the text is white due to the text title text attribute that we specified. If we click on an item, then you can see the progress bar is white and the button as well. And there we go. So now we have used a lot of components that we have already created this year, like the sidebar or the CoreData helper. We have used other components. We again refreshed our knowledge about CoreData. Now don't forget to comment below this video on how you would like to improve this app further to get these Udemy courses for free. And actually all there's left to say now is have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.